Welcome to this week's episode of Promising Young Surgeon. I am so excited today to welcome our guest, Dr. Brittany Bankhead. She is a double board certified trauma and general surgeon and a surgical intensivist. She's a highly accomplished entrepreneur with experience in Medtech development, consulting, and real estate, in addition to, of course, her clinical practice. Dr. Bankhead, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is fun.
I think that it's so cool that, and of course, everyone's going to get to hear this about you shortly, but I really love how you are able to balance all these different aspects of your life, including, your clinical and academic work with all these side projects with, of course, your beautiful family. So,
yeah, thank you. Thanks. It's a wild ride, but it's fun kind of crafting the life that you want instead of the life that you were told you were supposed to want. So,
yeah. Exactly. Yes, I love that. And that's what a lot of us, I think, are trying to do because in my experience, it seems like historically that in medicine, a lot of it was just like one size fits all. An older gentleman, back in the day, he decides he wants to become a surgeon. He becomes a surgeon, and he's, it drew much more of one type of person to the field. And of course, now there's like this generational, diversification of all the work that we're doing, including more women in surgery.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Even in our lifetime, in our career, I mean, you're talking over generations, but even now, just since I'm 38, and even just since I started medical school until now, it's like there's also been a huge evolution of what you're able to do, what you're able to talk about. And it's really important that we continue to do those things for those that continue to come behind us. As a medical student, I remember I really felt like I could only wear dark black suits to conferences. Like that was it. And I could only be somber and serious. Because if you were nice and bubbly, that would be considered unprofessional. And I couldn't ever talk about my kid at work because that would be unprofessional. And so I think the more and more that we continue to be ourselves and realize that we can be who we are as people and as humans and as women and as entrepreneurs and as whatever we want to be, and be a good clinical physician, those things don't have to be mutually exclusive. So that is really, really important, I think.
Yes, I love that so much. And like I can say, in my now decades since I began, the journey as a medical student, that I always suspected that it didn't have to be mutually exclusive and it didn't have to be one size fits all, but I didn't really believe it. And I didn't feel comfortable myself to show real parts of me until I saw really other women in medicine do it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right.
Wow.
You're absolutely right.
And, I want to call out specifically when you mention, the drab black suits and things like that, like to share with our listeners. Dr. Bankhead and I met at the Association of Women Surgeons conference out in San Francisco this fall. And it was honestly one of the most fun conferences I've ever been to, definitely one of the most educational, but truly from a fashion standpoint, in terms of the looks, I had the most fun ever. Like in terms of putting together my own looks, it was like a sea of color. I mean, you rarely saw a drab, like all black, all gray suit. It was like, why do we have men at any of the conferences? Like this is no, I'm just kidding. But it wasn't.
It is. And don't get me wrong, like there is a time and a place for like a sleek and chic black suit, right? Like there's a time and a place for it, but it doesn't always have to be that way. And you can wear color and still be professional, and you can wear something nicely tailored and not baggy and still be professional. Like that's okay. And you can smile. That's okay too. You don't have to be so serious. I think that like really puts some of that older generation on edge. I think it really like makes them uncomfortable and like, I'm here for it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, we're exactly like respectfully, we're kind of here for it. And I
Yeah.
even want to posit like the opposite situation, which for me, especially in a conference setting, I mean, like giant groups of people, especially people I don't know. And I think I knew one person at the conference going into it. So, you know, I am much more reserved. Like I don't smile that much. But guess what? Some older physicians really love to do is say, you should be smiling more. And guess what? I didn't hear at this, conference of all women.
Yeah.
Not one, not one female bothered me to be like, why aren't you smiling more? Like,
You should
oh, are
smile
you
more.
ornery today? Like, yeah, what's going on? Like, you just could kind of mind your own business. People were complimenting each other's jewelry, like the nice fits. Some people asked me about my bag. Like, it was just, it was really nice because I guess that regardless of even if you're smiling too much or not enough, none of those things register to me. I don't think there is really too much or not enough. I would just say, you're doing you. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. You get to be who you are. And it turns out that who you are can be really good at patient care and really great at research and all of the things, no matter what that looks like. Yeah.
Well, I love it so much. It's always nice to chat with a kindred spirit about this, but I'd love for you to kind of share with us just your initial background, what really drew you into trauma surgery and a bit of an overview on how you got to this point in your career, which we'll then dive into.
Yeah, it's been a little bit of a wild ride, I'm not gonna lie. I went to Ross University, a Caribbean medical school, and I went with my husband. We were both medical students at the same time. That obviously afforded both of us a little bit more difficult of a road, being FMGs and trying to get into a surgical residency in an emergency medicine co-match situation with a kid that we had in medical school. And so I started as a prelim at Methodist Dallas, and then I matched into a categorical position at a small community hospital in Michigan, which was great. After 2 years, I had continued to do research with the place back in Texas. And so a spot opened up at UT Austin for a lateral transfer. So I transferred to this big, awesome academic place as a PGY3, and I finished my training there, my chief year, and then went on to the Massachusetts General Harvard Program for Surgical Critical Care in 2019. And as we all know, 2020 came around and I was a critical care fellow and caught the big brunt at our hospital of the East Coast with COVID. And so that was really formidable in my life. And then had my first job out of training at Texas Tech in Lubbock, Texas. And I was there for 4 years and actually just moved to Charleston, South Carolina, and was promoted to associate professor. And I'm super happy here.
That's awesome. Well, congrats on the promotion.
Thank you. Thanks.
That's incredible. So, I mean, yeah, I really respect that is a long journey. And that's a journey with, like multiple shifts, a change mid-residency. That's like not picked apart, I'm sure. Did you feel like it was as seamless as it could be?
Well, I made it that way. Honestly, I've been told on multiple occasions that I'm pretty stinking resilient and I've got a lot of grit. And, for better or for worse, being an international medical graduate to start, that really pushed me to gain those attributes and those qualities pretty early on. And I had to figure out my way if I was going to make a way for myself in the world. And you can probably tell that theme kind of permeated them throughout the rest of my life. And I'll actually go back to your trauma surgery question too. I just realized I didn't even talk about how I got into trauma.
Yeah.
So when I was going through training, I realized that I did a lot better as a mom, when I was kind of planted somewhere and doing that wholeheartedly. So I would go into work and I could really like dive in and be there. And when I was home and I wasn't having to answer calls at home about things. I wasn't good about splitting my time with home call. And so I wanted to do something that I didn't have to have a lot of home call for. And I really liked the sickest of the sick patients and patients who kind of woke up that day, didn't know they were going to have an awful day. I get to help be there and guide them through both physically getting them through it, mentally, emotionally getting them through it, helping families, discussing with families, and practicing critical care too. I felt like from a career standpoint, that was a good fit for me to have both a technical aspect to my practice and a kind of a more mental one, if you will, in case anything ever happened to me physically.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I liked all of that about that part of the career.
Do you currently then in your responsibilities have any home call, or is it just when you're on the unit?
So I have backup. We have backup call.
Oh,
I have in the last 4.5 years been called in a handful of times. But the cool thing about being called in for backup when you're on trauma call is something crazy is going on, and they will be super grateful for you showing up and helping out and offering an extra set of hands. And so it just doesn't feel as bad because it's not nearly as often and it's high stress, high energy, and a lot of kind of endorphins are kicking in to like get things done and work together as a team. And so even the backups don't feel like awful.
as onerous. That totally makes sense because one thing I miss, like I'm in solo rural practice for ENT.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, solo practice, yeah, like that can be lonely. I would say that I'm lucky because we have a great crew in the ENT clinic and like we work really closely together. They still help with, of course, like some of the patient care, longitudinal patient care, even if they're in the hospital or going for surgery or things like that.
Right.
So it is nice. Like I'm not alone, and I do feel that camaraderie within our team.
Mm-hmm.
But it used to be legitimately more fun. Like I remember being a junior resident and having buddy call, like an intern with it. And it just was like for not a really easily discernible reason. It would just be more fun. We'd be like, all right, what's up? And I would still like really do the work. I would do the notes still. I wasn't dumping those on the intern, but just like mere act of having a buddy. It really was very fun and it made time fly by. I guess that's kind of what you experience if you're the backup.
Absolutely. Yeah. And really, I mean, any day on trauma or acute care surgery call with your other partners that are there, it's the same way. You're very often tag teaming things. You're asking for another set of eyes, running a case by each other. And the teaching aspect of it at an academic place is really really rewarding. And it's I kind of realized recently that the ability to use, because we go through so much trauma, right? The trauma of tough cases, difficult patients, losses, hard nights away from our families, all these things. And so it's kind of therapeutic almost to be able to take all of those collective experiences and to be able to do something good with it and to be able to teach residents and medical students in whatever modality, whether it's a podcast or, on-site training, you get to kind of bundle up all those lessons and make it worth something. And so that's a really rewarding part of my job too.
I love that. Yeah, that's wonderful. And can you speak to just really quickly for people who, aren't as familiar with the type of like attending schedule for what you do? What is the on and off time like? Because you mentioned, when you're on, you're really on. So what are the times like for that?
Oh, yeah. So for any trauma surgeon across the country, it's really widely variable in terms of the expectations of what your schedule looks like. So I'll speak to mine. I've always worked at level 1, meaning the most intense and severe acute trauma comes to us. Level 1 trauma centers, and I've always worked in academic settings, meaning I'm always going to be teaching in some modality with residents and medical students. And so for me, everywhere I've worked has had shift work so far. And so it's kind of like emergency medicine, I guess, in that way, in that when I walk in those doors, I'm on for that set amount of time, and whatever comes in the door is mine, and I'm taking and I'm operating on and I'm managing and I'm doing procedures on. And then when I walk out of those doors, I'm done. And I'm not going back in to do something. If something happens overnight to that patient, and they need to go back to the operating room, it's going to be my partner who's also on call and also a trauma surgeon. And so our job requires constant, good, closed loop communication, constant, good, really good handoffs. Because of the model that we have, you just can't sustain it 24/7 all the time because you're really busy whenever you're there. And so you have to have that mental release, and having leadership that understands that and is supportive of that is really key to a long-term career.
That makes sense. Well, absolutely. Overall, everything that, I've learned about you, I really appreciate. And I say this as a compliment. I think you're very scrappy. And I personally think I'm like a little scrappy, and I'm trying to actively develop that within myself. So I think hearing how you did it, how the sausage is made and things like that, like that's such an underrated skill, I think, for a doc and even for a surgeon. Like, honestly, I know a lot of doctors who aren't scrappy. They just kind of like take what is given to them and they live inside of a box. And
because you're absolutely right. I take it as a compliment for sure. All of that gritty. Yeah, I'm here for it. And it does make you an entirely different person to have that skill set, for sure.
Well, especially because we want to hear all about your life, your other identity, which includes being an entrepreneur. And so what was the first thing that led you to even dip your toes into the entrepreneurial pool? Because obviously everything you're describing does sound consuming, mentally and time consuming.
Yeah. Well, I'll say, first of all, I have total imposter syndrome when you say you're an entrepreneur. And I know I spoke on an entrepreneur panel and I was asked to be, I know that. And when I look at my CV, I think, no, I guess I am, but I still have major imposter syndrome about it. I've come out of the clinical imposter syndrome now. I'm like, yeah, I know what to do and where I'm ready to be, all those things. But now I've got entrepreneur imposter syndrome. So it kind of started by accident, and was more of a patient care focused thing. So I was teaching Stop the Bleed back in my chief year of residency, and it was in Austin. And I went across the street, taught at the Frank Moody Coliseum to all these different volunteers. And if you're not familiar with Stop the Bleed, it's teaching regular everyday non-medical people how to stop bleeding. So life-threatening bleeding, teaching them how to stop it. Unfortunately, mass casualty events, that kind of thing, trying to get people equipped and aware. And so as I was teaching them, I realized that this little model that we were using and the skills that we were teaching, it just wasn't really lifelike. And it wasn't really doing a bang-up job in terms of people knowing exactly what this is going to be like. So, and that, while we're showing them these skills in a real crazy bleeding situation, it didn't feel like it was going to really translate. So, with that, I was like, I wish we just had a trainer that could actually be bleeding and people could practice on that, because that would at least be a little bit more lifelike. And so I worked with the University of Texas engineering department and this tiny little grant that the surgery department gave us. And we worked for the year, and the engineering students and us would collaborate and go back and forth. And then they had this end of year kind of design thing, and it was really cool. But then it was over and I left for fellowship, and that was kind of the end of it. And then when I got to Mass Gen, they were doing innovation and just starting kind of a design lab and coordinating with MIT. And I was only there for a year, so I couldn't dive in too much, and especially with COVID. But
Right.
I realized that I still found that intriguing. And it really pushed my limits and kind of this like creative side of me. And so then when I got to my first job at Texas Tech, they had an innovation hub, and a really well-established kind of infrastructure and ecosystem for innovation. And so I kind of picked it back up and said, well, like this is still kind of interesting to me, and I still think this is needed. And so we went on to form a little group of a little MBA, not a little, an MBA student and a medical student and some engineering students. And we all kind of worked together. And then that project grew, and then we got more funding, and then it grew. And then the university looked at it and said, actually, this is a really marketable, good thing. And so then they got behind it. And long story short, we ended up with an NSF I-Corps grant that helped us do customer discovery. We pivoted to a military focus, and now we have a patent pending and an LLC and all of these really cool things that I didn't even know was possible. And I am so out of my league and learning how to do, but we've got potential really big name corporate collaborations now. I'm applying for a big federal grant to help improve it. So it's kind of, it has genuinely evolved because I wanted to help people understand how to stop bleeding in a better and more realistic way. And so I think for me, starting that entrepreneurial process, I've read a lot of books in the interim since then, especially in the last 6 months. And it seems like most good entrepreneurial ideas come with the basis of wanting to help others. And so that part of my entrepreneurial skill set, at least in innovation, it's really been the case for me. Everything goes back to that wanting to help, and that has really fueled and kept me on a good straight path of making it a good thing. So we'll see where that goes.
I love this for you. I mean,
Yeah.
of course, congrats. And I know that these are
Thanks.
like the two sides of the coin, because you feel like some days you still have some imposter syndrome. And of course, like I hear this and I'm like, I'm just in awe. Like I have heart eyes. I'm like, that's really incredible. And of course, I think if you saw it from where I'm sitting, then yeah, you'd be like, this woman's incredible. So
thank you.
I love that. And I want to highlight, I'm such a quotes person, but the quote that I was reminded of as you were detailing the years and the steps and like the continued interest and pursuit of this is the saying, the day you plant the seed is not the day you eat the fruit.
That is absolutely true. Yes. With everything in life, right?
Exactly. And social media is such a highlight reel. So like at the end of the day, when this is a huge successful product, people are going to look at you and be like, wow, that was like a breeze, because we don't know what went into, making it often. So
that's exactly right. Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah. And I think that really kickstarted me thinking, and well, I'll be honest. So between that process and realizing, oh, this could actually become something, and at the same time needing to get over my barrier and my hump of just academia in general, and this unspoken thing about if you're really in academics and if you're really about patient care and if you're really about teaching, you won't partner with industry and you won't try to make money in any other way. Like this is your calling, this is your everything. And we kind of become like that's what we should be totally infatuated with. And And so again, this realization, kind of like I did with like how I dress and how I act and talking about my kids at work, I also kind of realized, no. I can go on to create a product that may partner with a DoD contract. It may partner with another industry help, but the goal is to still help people. And what better, I think I said this at the conference that we met at, somebody's going to be in a boardroom somewhere talking about this kind of stuff. And why should it not be us who actually understand the implications of the things they're talking about and having a seat at that table? Because it's going to happen anyway. So why shouldn't we be the ones there better informing them and making better products and simulation devices and like it doesn't make sense why we wouldn't be there. And that doesn't mean that I don't care about my patients or that I'm not a good teacher. So that's another, I mean, in a short career, that's another thing I'm trying to address and like help people to stop worrying about so much. You can have a collaboration and a sponsorship and a whatever. And as long as you're disclosing that and being intentional about making sure that that doesn't affect what it is that you're doing, then we should still do those things.
No, 1,000,000%. I mean, also, and I think that there's some interesting implications. Like, even if there was a physician who, in this setting, which is like late capitalism, undertook a venture that was profitable, some people frown about upon that. They're like, this is a calling. So again, I don't know why you're doing some like capitalist stuff. It's like, well, so anyway, but we won't go down that rabbit hole. I just want to, I just want to emphasize, I really agree with you, and it really stuck with me. But one of the things that you pointed out on the panel was the quote unquote, the disclosure slide. And for those of you who haven't like been to a grand rounds or seen one of these academic talks, it's just at the beginning of every talk, there's kind of the title slide that has the title of the talk. It has the presenter's name and maybe their institution affiliations, what have you. And then the next slide is going to be disclosures. And I'm glad you're talking about this because there is such a stigma sometimes, especially I think in academia more than not, but where like, okay, so, you're here, you're giving a grand rounds in an academic department, your disclosure slide has like 4 different things on it. People are starting to wonder, they're like, yeah, what kind of doctor are you? That's so many disclosures. Like, are you, was helping people not enough? Now you want to make some extra money?
It's this emoji face of like, oh, like I can't believe it's there. But also like, sorry, doctors don't get paid like we used to. And we have loans out the wazoo. We're trying to create a life for our kids. And it's just like, why can't I do both those things? I can. Yeah. And so that also led to one of my other ventures that you had brought up and that we talked about is consulting. So for the state of Texas, it's called TTAF. I go and I consult with level 3 and 4 trauma centers across the state of Texas. Myself and a nurse come in and over 2 days help provide kind of a snapshot of the entire program and all the different disciplines that are involved in running a trauma system. And we give them feedback on how they can better their program, things that they might be delinquent in, that would come from the state of Texas in order to help give them their verification. Now, do I get paid for that service? Yes. Do I get paid if you want to call it my hourly rate for my salary, if you translate all that in terms of my day job? No, it's not. It's not that much. Do I help people? You better believe I do. When I come in and I see things that are not up to the standard of care, I am pointing it out. And that has a direct implication on patient care. It's in a different way, but it still absolutely has a direct impact on that. When I'm at these places, I think about in this tiny town in Texas, if my grandmother was brought into this emergency room, is she going to receive the same standard of care as a big urban level 1 center? And that guides a lot of how I provide that feedback. So, am I getting compensation for that? Yes. Does it mean that I'm not providing good ultimate patient care? No, it means I actually am improving the quality of the program by performing that work. Because sorry, but there's not really anyone better to do it than people who are in the shoes that I'm in and are up to date on evidence-based care and up to date on standards of practice. And so, yeah, it should be me at that table having those discussions and helping these trauma centers become better.
Of course, like you are the natural person to logically be doing that role. I feel like it just, but it says a lot about the current state of, medical and surgical culture and training that you even feel like you need to defend that because honestly, doing this type of consultant work is also another way for us to stretch our creative minds and say, hey, I looked at this from a different lens. And, like I said, I mean, we could also just have creative pursuits. Like if you told me that you played jazz clubs for like a consultant fee in your free time, like we need to be, I mean, some people would be judging though, because they'd be like, so you're telling me, they'd be like, hold up. So mom, surgeon, and now jazz club musician. And then their like heads would explode. Like they wouldn't be able to fathom it. But I love that you're doing it. I think that it barely even merits an explanation. Like you and the people who do what you do are the natural fit to be commenting on that kind of work. And like just for people who aren't necessarily doing this or what we do, like I could not do what you do, an ENT surgeon getting their opinion on this, like it's fine. I guess I'd probably have like some more helpful thoughts than a lay person, but not like up to the standards that you are living in and, like providing to your patients every day for years. So I think that says a lot. What I wanted to make sure that we get to hit on a little bit is just this interesting, again, like kind of the culture, maybe some of the stigma around it, where like, let's look at the optics of it, because I just want to remind everyone, even though I wish this wasn't the case, right? Like it'd be the height of hubris to think that like when I show up to anything, I'm 6 feet tall and Asian and a woman. Those things are pretty obvious and I can't even mask them, though I have tried a million different ways to mask them or like make myself smaller for years. And so, in your case, you're a young woman who's showing up to this role traditionally held by, older gentlemen. And like, what is that like for you to do that job, to show up to these smaller hospitals in Texas as the expert?
Yeah. That's like, you hit the nail right on the head, because it is not it's for a long time it was just my anecdotal experience and the trauma bay that when I would come up to the front of the room or the foot of the bed, whatever you want to call it, and I would let everybody know what we were going to be doing, I got a lot of eye rolls. I got a lot of ignoring me. I got a lot of, and these kinds of things. And my male counterparts would not. Or EMS would roll in with the patient and they would look at the male next to me and, give, even if it was a student, they would give them sign out instead of me because I don't look like the surgeon. And so I have turned that into research, because I always tell my residents the things that piss you off the most make the best research. And so I turned that into a multidisciplinary research thing. And that has helped me to really kind of quantify how that looks in terms of interactions and who exactly is feeling that and why they might be feeling that. Anyway, it's a lot of nuanced things, but
like a qualitative study.
Yeah. It started as qualitative. We've moved on to survey studies. Next phase is
Wow.
actually using trauma video review to see the differences and the nuances.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I've that's been eye-opening to me in just first of all, like knowing that it actually exists, that I'm not crazy and that it really is a thing, that we are treated differently. Like we knew it, but to see the numbers and to hear the study, it's validating. And that's where you have to start, right? Is in order to make it any better, you got to understand where we're starting. And I'm a little off track, I know, but it's like no one can understand how frustrating it is for people like you and I, for women like you and I, to just want to take good care of patients and to just want to do our job. And our jobs are hard enough and stressful enough and deep enough before you ever add on a layer of sexism. Let's call it what it is.
Sexism,
misogyny, implicit bias, all of those things. So it is a fight to overcome those barriers for sure. But again, I have found that the more I can harness those experiences and what I have learned and how I've learned to deal with them, and I can wrap them up and teach them to my female residents and also to my male residents. I point out to them sometimes, hey, do you see your female resident over there? They're not listening to her. Be aware. It's not happening to you, but just this is like good education for you to see. You don't know what you don't know. Be helpful in the world to help start to spread that and don't propagate it. But the best thing I have found, whether it's fair or not, remains to be seen. But I have found that in those small rural towns in Texas and in my trauma bay, wherever it may be, the more that I can teach and think out loud, the more it affords people's trust in me, that even though I don't look like what they expected, I'm not an old male surgeon who they would characteristically think as professional and knowledgeable. The more I talk out loud and the more I teach others, the more that they can hear my thought processes and be comfortable with either the orders that I'm giving or the feedback that I'm providing or the patient care that I'm administering. That's how I have found best to, instead of finger wagging or being irritated and annoyed, I've found that to be the most effective way of overcoming that bias.
I can't wait to see, what your research shows. And like, I love that you really are able to like take all of your learned and lived experiences and then, make something very productive, packaged for the next generation to really help them. But I'm like I said, I look forward to learning from it even myself because I'm an earlier career attending. I will say it's interesting because I, by nature, do think out loud. Like I talk out loud, I think out loud. Of course, like I said, on the ENT clinic side, we have a great crew and a lot of them have now been working in ENT for like 1 or 2 years with me here. So we talk a lot about like the pathology, ways that this can show up, like red flag words, right, for the phone or for a referral. But what's interesting, and I noticed this more in the OR, because in the OR, I am in the setting where like the teams rotate. So it's like, it could just be strangers. So people are like, they don't know me. I do talk out loud a lot. So I'll just say, okay. And then I'm thinking this is what I'm looking at. That's a little bit of a holdover from like later residency. Like I'll say, this is what I'm looking at. And I'm being very mindful. I'm not going to go near the nerve here. I'll just, and I'm talking to kind of no one now. But what's interesting is that I have wondered if it counts against me in this specific setting where I'm doing it, because guess what? the last time that they happened to rotate through with someone like me who did this case, it was like maybe a handful of times in the past 10, 15 years. And guess what? Those people don't talk at all out loud.
Right.
So I think that sometimes they wonder, they're like, oh, is this girl processing? Like, does she not know? Because like all the people I know who do this surgery in the neck, like they are just dead quiet. I mean, they just don't even say a word the whole time. And it's like, you know, so I think that it's really interesting because there also are these other studies like across industries, not medicine specific, where like people over explain themselves or like, but I do think women in medicine probably feel that need to over explain themselves. I hear stories where an attending will say to a staff member, like, you know, I'm leaving at 2, figure it out, and just walk out. Whereas like if I am leaving 20 minutes early, I'm like, hello, I'm really sorry about this. I'm going to present to you like my 5 points about why I have to be somewhere like 20 minutes earlier than usual.
Yeah. Well, because the first example you gave, that's when we get written up for being rude.
Well, it is rude. Like I'm not saying that where I'm like, oh, I want to be that jerk where I can be like, yeah, make it happen. Like, or just like call and be like, I'm not coming in today. But, you know, I think it's interesting that a set of physicians are allowed to do that. I would actually just argue maybe everyone should have to live by the rules that we live by. I'm not saying this should be carte blanche. We can all be jerks at work. Well, kind of that.
It's interesting too, because so in the trauma bay for me, there are times where I need to say things as quick and blunt as that. And like, there's not time, right? There's not time to give a 5-minute presentation on why I need you to hang a lactated ring or a unit of blood. Like, I can't spell that out for you. And so, a little bit of understanding and breaking the mold, like you've said.
But it's cool. I mean, I'm sure both of us could talk for like another hour about like the female role models that we had that like, they inspired me because they were tough cookies. And they were like, this, you have to be in the hospital. This is how you have to move in the hospital. Don't look at the guys. It's different for them. So, you know, I'll just tell you.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, I really, really appreciate everything that you've chatted with me about. But I did want to ask, you know, if you could leave our listeners with one piece of advice for breaking the mold and pursuing their passions, what would it be?
Start now. We didn't really delve into the real estate part of things, so I'm sorry about that. But for all 3 of those ventures in my life, that I think for a lot of your listeners, probably we're all kind of on this, like we talked about this, you know, head down, work, get through it. We're all chugging along on the same train, trying to get to where we need to be. But if there are other things that you want to add to your life or that make you feel like you're living a more whole life and living your life to the fullest, just start now. Don't feel like you have to. You have responsibilities, yes, and those responsibilities look different as a medical student, a resident, and a attending. But you don't have to wait until you're an attending to take a trip to decompress, and you don't have to wait until you're a resident to start a little bit of investing in a small property with a few other people, and you don't have to wait to dabble in entrepreneurial things. I know a resident who like has a shorts company, which is really cool. He has his own shortcuts. So whatever it is, it's okay to start now and to start living your life. You don't have to put your life on hold for the big, you know, conceptualized plan of medicine that everything must fall in this certain way, and that's not a thing. That's a thing of the past. And be who you are and do it now. And there's plenty of us out there who are happy to help and guide and cheer you on.
That's a really beautiful sentiment. And I agree. Phenomenal advice. I also want to link it to, you know, the nature of especially your work, but even I'm impacted by this in my work. Like, life is too short and life is not guaranteed.
Yeah.
And life is too short. So, I mean, I have a different appreciation for that as an attending surgeon compared to even like as an earlier resident. When I was a young resident, I was like, I'm going to live forever. What's it? You know, I mean, you don't have that sense, but, you know, certainly I love your advice. I agree with start now, because what is sad is to think about people who have that arrival fallacy, or, you know, they're thinking on the horizon, maybe when I'm no longer an early career attending. So, you know, maybe at that point, that would be a good time for me to start to consider to gain some of these other skills. So,
and all those skills and that creativity, the budgeting, the reading, the traveling, any of those things make you such a better, well-rounded physician and human. Like, those things make you relatable and fulfilled in ways that just head in books never can. So it will make you better at patient care too, if that's important to you, as it should be.
Yeah. Agreed. Well, thank you so much for sharing your inspiring story and your insights with us. Where can our listeners find and connect with you online?
Good question. Probably Twitter and Instagram are my kind of most visited platforms, and it's at B as in Brittany Bankhead, Bankhead ND. That's it. B Bankhead ND on both.
Perfect. Absolutely. And I, like, as a shout out, I love following you on Instagram. I think that you do such a beautiful job on social media.
I try again to be that, you know, honest. And so here we are cleaning on a Friday night, and it's beautiful and it's fun. And here I am walking into work for a really fun day as a trauma surgeon, and that's really cool too. So you can have it all.
Follow me on Instagram at francismay.md and at Rethinking Residency. Visit my website, rethinkingresidency.com, to learn more about resident physician stories and ways that residents can most effectively navigate the game of residency. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Promising Young Surgeon. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Until next time, keep growing, and again, you can start today. If you'd like to submit any questions for future episodes, email me at pys@heyinfluent.com.